With his Star Wars contract completed, George Lucas now needed a rebel force up to the challenge of production. In the summer of 1975, he founded the visual effects company Industrial Light and Magic.
There was no special effects companies in those days, and the studio's special effects department had been disbanded. Part of that was because of the expense, and part of it was that the American taste, the culture had gone toward very realistic-looking films.
We approached the visual effects as a grand experiment and saying, can we do this with a lot of people who work on architectural models and in commercials and have never made feature films before?
We were kind of like a weird kind of fraternity of robotic photography nuts or something like that. I mean, this was a big movie for Fox. We were doing commercials. We all dreamed about doing a feature, and this was like the dream come true. So Star Wars came along just the perfect time for us.
We moved into a big empty warehouse in Van Nuys, right near the Van Nuys airport, and basically started from scratch. I mean, it was empty. In the early days, you used to park your car inside. There was no cam equipment, no rooms to speak of.
Supervising at ILM was John Dykstra, an effects cameraman who had worked under Douglas Trumbull on films like Silent Running.
I was essentially to be responsible for doing the visual effects for the film. We took the concept of motion control, which is essentially an old concept of being able to duplicate camera motion through more than one pass so that you can generate multiple elements of film, and we made it production savvy by tying it into a computer, which was at that point custom-built microprocessors. There were no PCs. You didn't go down buying a PC. We built them from scratch.
At the same time the camera system was being built, another team began constructing model spaceships.
I was one of the early hires. They had a small art department, and there were some concept models made out of cardboard and model kit pieces. There were some storyboards and some concept illustrations that Joe Johnson had done. There were some paintings that Ralph McQuarrie had done.
Everything came either from my sketches or Ralph's paintings and drawings and any input that George might have, you know. There wasn't a lot of outside influences on Star Wars.
George wanted it to look like you could actually see the rivets, so you could see the logic of how it was made. I was originally hired to work on the Death Star, the 40-foot by, 40 by 80 feet or 40 by 60 feet or something like that. Nobody wanted to do the job because you had to spend a lot of time on your knees.
Everybody sort of could cross-train and work in different techniques. That was different in the Hollywood system that had very strict sort of union rules. But there was no way that this work could be done that way, or no way that the Hollywood unions could understand what we were doing.
With pre-production gaining momentum, Lucas next began the process of casting his galactic opus. He shared the audition stage with his friend Brian De Palma, who was seeking actors for the Stephen King shocker, Carrie.
It just happened that we were both making these movies and casting at the same time, so we decided to combine our efforts. I've made movies with very young people that have no track record, so I have to kind of go through and discover them, pick them, and then test them and go through them and have readings. And so it takes a long time. I spent probably 6 or 7 months casting Star Wars, and that's a long process to sit in a little room and interview people. And I interviewed thousands of people.
In casting the male leads, Luke Starkiller and Han Solo, Lucas looked for individual screen presence as well as chemistry between performers.
Well, it checks out again. There's no mistake. You can't find Organa Major? I found it. It's just not there.
No, I found it. It's just not there.
What's left of it is contaminated. That's it there. Look at those radiation readouts. It's impossible. I've never seen anything like it.
The Empire must have gotten here first.
The planet has been completely blown away.
For the pivotal role of Luke, Lucas needed an actor who could project both intelligence and integrity.
Yeah, well, she's part of the royal family. They won't get anything out of her. She knows the power of mind control.
She's part of the royal family. They won't get any information from her. She knows the art of mind control.
24-year-old Mark Hamill was a familiar face on television. A newcomer to films, his wholesome, easygoing manner fit the part perfectly.
I can remember a line from the screen test, which I don't think ever will leave me. And Luke says, but we can't turn back. Fear is their greatest defense. I doubt if the actual security there is any greater than it was on Aquilai or Sullust, and what there is most likely directed towards a large-scale assault.
Fear is their greatest defense. I doubt if the actual security there is much greater than on Aquilai or Sullust, and what there is most likely directed towards a large-scale assault.
And I read that line, I thought, who talks like this? So I just did it sincerely.
Well, how many more systems have to get blown away before you have no place to hide and are forced to fight? Don't you realize what's going on?
Kid, you take the glory and the good intentions. I'll take the reward.
The role of Han Solo needed someone older, with a more cynical edge.
What's that little droid carrying that's so blasted important?
What's the little droid carrying that's so important?
Harrison Ford had worked with Lucas on American Graffiti, but because the director initially only wanted new faces, he was not allowed to audition.
Wait a sec, do I have to sit up to get in the right?
Instead, he was brought in to feed lines to the other actors.
I was given sides and asked if I would help read the other actors. It became my task to explain to the other actors who were coming along just what it was that these sides were meant to be about.
They're going to follow us, they'll destroy your hidden bases, they'll destroy the whole system.
Right, I know they'll follow, and they'll bring the Death Star too.
Lucas may have been reluctant to use Ford at first, but the actor won him over by giving Han a mix of mercenary swagger and world weariness.
All right.
Well, what was so clear was what the idea was of the character relationships. Mark was the callow youth, and I was the smartass, and we each had a clear section of turf to explore.
The planet's totally blown away. It would have taken 1,000 ships with more firepower than I've ever seen to do that. If the Empire had a new weapon that could do this, I'd know about it. I'd have heard something.
Well, you know about it now. If the enemy's on the move, we haven't much time.
Well, I brought you here, now what?
We've got to find the rebels. What we're carrying belongs to them.
Their bases are very well hidden, son. All the power of the Empire can't find them. You know where they are?
No, not anymore.
Well, I'm not going to take you on an impossible chase across the galaxy.
Virtually every young actress in Hollywood tried out for the part of Princess Leia. Although the character was the same age as Luke, as a leader of the rebellion, Leia needed to project a confidence beyond her years.
The plans and specifications to a battle station with enough firepower to destroy an entire system. Our only hope in destroying it is to find its weakness, which we will determine from the data I stored in R2.
Now, our only hope in destroying it is to find its weakness, which we'll do from the data I stored in R2. Okay? Now, we captured the plans in a raid on the Imperial shipyards, but we fell under attack before I could get the data to safety, so I hid it in R2 and sent him off.
When R2 has been safely delivered to my forces, you get your reward.
What?
You have my guarantee.
What's the little droid carrying that's so blasted important?
The plans and specifications to a battle station with enough firepower to destroy an entire system.
One actress in particular seemed tailor-made to play a princess. As the daughter of actress Debbie Reynolds and singer Eddie Fisher, Carrie Fisher was the product of Hollywood royalty. She had no trouble conveying the self-assurance needed for Leia Organa.
I met with Brian De Palma and George, and Brian did all the talking, because George didn't talk then. There were incredible actresses that were my age that were being considered for this role, so I didn't think I would get it.
But our only hope is to destroy it before it destroys us. But hiding is useless now. With the Death Star, they'll continue to go on destroying systems until they found us. We have no alternative but to process the information and use it while there's still time.
I got it with the proviso that I went to a fat farm and that I lose 10 pounds. And that I think they were hoping it was going to come out 5 here and 5 here. And my character was someone who was feisty and all of that. But I felt myself to be a bit of that too, so it would have been unlikely that I would be cast as a shrinking violet. He cast us to type in a way.
Lucas's decision to hire unknowns went against the advice of his friend Francis Ford Coppola, who had cast The Godfather with stage and screen stars. 20th Century Fox was also concerned about Lucas's choice of actors.
He came in and said, these are the three unknown people that I want to go with. And I figured we've gone down this far on the road, he knows what he's doing. I'd be lying if I said that, oh my God, Harrison's perfect, and Carrey's perfect, and Mark is fantastic. No, I was very nervous about the cast.
For the important role of aged Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi, Lucas recognized that he needed an established star. Sir Alec Guinness was a veteran of over 40 films and had won an Oscar in 1958 for his performance in The Bridge on the River Kwai. The knighted actor had the pedigree and the persona.
The Alec Guinness role required a certain stability and gravitas as a character, which meant we needed a very, very strong character actor to play that part.
Signing Guinness was a major coup, but more casting would be done in London, where Star Wars would be principally produced. Unlike Lucas's home base of Northern California, London provided access to the kind of massive sound stages needed for Star Wars' ambitious sets. The location also gave Lucas access to Britain's top production talents. The character of Darth Vader demanded someone of commanding physical stature. To fill Vader's boots, Lucas cast champion bodybuilder David Prowse, whose resume included roles like Frankenstein's creature in Hammer's popular horror movies. As Vader's evil accomplice, Governor Tarkin, another Hammer alumnus was cast, 63-year-old Peter Cushing. Best known as the methodical Professor Van Helsing in Dracula, Cushing was the perfect choice to portray the Death Star's icy chief administrator. For the part of Chewbacca, Han Solo's towering Wookiee co-pilot, Lucas and Kurtz had to look outside normal casting channels. But at 7 feet 3 inches tall, it was no stretch for Peter Mayhew, who had been working as an orderly at a Yorkshire hospital.
I sat down on one of the sofas, waiting for George. The door opened, and George walked in with Gary behind him. So naturally, what did I do? I'm raised in England. As soon as someone comes in through the door, I stand up. George goes, and virtually turned to Gary and said, I think we found him.
Finding the right performers to portray robots was even more of a challenge. Production designers had constructed an assortment of robots and androids to populate the Star Wars universe. But it would take living, breathing actors to give personality to the two main droids, C-3PO and R2-D2. To operate R2, Lucas needed a performer small in stature, but with a big imagination. Enter 3-foot 5-inch stage comedian Kenny Baker.
They couldn't find anyone that would fit inside this robot to make it move. And they couldn't use kids because it was quite a heavy machine, you know, it was weighed about 80 pounds. Well, I've had a lot of experience of inside costumes and inside cats and dogs and goodness knows what else, you know. So when I got into the robot, you know, he said, look happy, so I'd go inside. No, nobody could see my expressions, obviously. But it just, you have to do something to get the feel of the thing.
Actor Anthony Daniels not only had the slender build needed for C-3PO, but training as a mime artist.
He'd been seeing people every 5 minutes. I was there for a while and thinking, well, nearly time to go, I guess. And then, kind of over George's shoulder, I saw painting. And the most extraordinary thing happened. It just struck me because I kind of looked at this face. And the face looked back at me, and we had this extraordinary eye contact. You know, he's looking right out of the picture, and he seemed to be saying, come, come, be with me. And the vulnerability in his face made me want to help him. Isn't that weird? He just looks utterly vulnerable. That painting completely changed my attitude to the whole project. Years later, I was able to go to Ralph McQuarrie and say, you realize this is all your fault.
In March 1976, With casting completed, George Lucas and company arrived in North Africa. It was a strange caravan of British and American filmmakers working in a French-speaking nation on a script few people believed in.
The overriding thing for me, really, at that stage was the amount of work that we had to do, the amount of stuff there was to achieve, and we had grave doubts about getting it done in time.
But the trial by fire had yet to begin. It was now up to Lucas to make his movie. Just one day into filming, the Sahara was pelted with its first major rainfall in 50 years.
We were going out there to shoot on the salt flat. I came out in the morning and the rain was going horizontally down the street this way. I thought, my God. I just called a rest day and the crew told them all to go back to bed because there was no way we were going to shoot on that.
It was the first 2 weeks of shooting. We'd run into a lot of weather problems. The sets had blown down. I didn't get everything shot. It was a disaster. At that point, I was pretty depressed, saying, boy, I've got myself in way over my head. I don't know what I'm going to do.
You must do what you feel is right, of course.
With temperatures topping 100 degrees by mid-morning, Tunisia was anything but fun in the sun. Baking for hours in heavy costume, even the film's stunt coordinator, Peter Diamond, found the conditions physically exhausting.
I was the only stunt person on the picture in Tunisia. I became a Tuscan raider or a sand person. I'm not a sun merchant. I don't like the sun, I just burn. So I just died with the heat of it. I couldn't stand it anymore. It was so hot. But there were so many problems. It just was not a good location.
We seem to be made to suffer. It's our lot in life.
C-3PO was finally put together for the very first time the day before we started shooting. R2-D2 didn't really function that well. He could run along in the three-legged position, but he couldn't turn his head at the same time.
Yeah, there were wires everywhere. And the head was on a track of ball bearings. I used to grab whatever I could grab hold of and turn it physically that way and that way, not very far. Because I went too far, the wires would go around my neck. And then they'd say, cut, right, break for lunch. And everybody just walk away and leave me. And then they'd remember me, you know, eventually. But that happened many times.
It was bad enough because putting on the costume for the first time. And within 2 paces, the left leg had shattered down onto the plastic of the left foot and was gently but forcibly and persistently knifing it into the soft part of my foot. So we took it off and I limped to the set with one foot. And it was then I began to panic about the days to come.
As the actors and crew began to grumble about the adverse conditions, it was Sir Alec Guinness who served as a role model of professionalism.
It was, for me, fascinating to watch Alec Guinness. He was always prepared, always professional, always very kind to the other actors. He had a very clear head about how to serve the story.
He was the person who sort of brought it some legitimacy. And I asked him why he wanted to do it. And he loved the idea of playing a mentor or a wizard in a morality play where good and evil so clearly defined.
Action!
3 or 4 seasons?
They're up for sale if you want them.
Let me see your identification.
You don't need to see his identification.
I don't need to see your identification.
These aren't the droids you're looking for.
These aren't the droids we're looking for.
He can go about his business.
You can go about your business.
Move along.
Lucas, meanwhile, was up to his neck in malfunctioning props, electronic breakdowns, and other production woes. Star Wars was already struggling to stay on schedule. The only silver lining was that after Tunisia, the production would be moving to a more controlled environment, Elstree Studios outside London. The stages at Elstree were among the largest in the world, and the sets, now finished after months of construction, were just as impressive. and for the first time, the entire Star Wars cast was together.
That was almost like a whole separate movie. It was like getting a whole fresh start, and it was all new, really.
We were all very different ages. I was 19, Harrison was 33, and he was sort of the big man on campus. And meeting him, you sort of felt, well, he'll be a movie star.
Costumes, makeup, robots, and aliens were all ready to go.
I put that mask on, and Chewie transformed me. I transformed, the attitude was different, the walk was different. Chewie turned on, do the scenes, come back, take the mask off, Peter was back.
Action.
That old man's mad.
You said it, Chewie. Boy, where did you dig up that old fossil?
Ben is a great man.
Yeah, great at getting us into trouble.
I didn't hear you give any ideas.
But working at Elstree Studios didn't mean the production was free from problems or strict British Union regulations.
At 5:30, we had to stop unless we were in the middle of a shot. I could ask the crew for an extra 15 minutes, but they always voted me down.
I'm not putting down the British crew, but there was kind of attitude like, what is this?
It didn't help that most of the crew thought Star Wars was just a children's film. At times, even the actors were hard-pressed to take the work seriously.
Didn't think it was going to be any good. Whereas I didn't. I thought, this is a bit strange. And I can remember this lighting man. He said, what is all this about? He said, I can't, it's a load of rubbish, you know. And we all thought it the same at the time. Thought, yeah, this is a bit strange.
It was a princess with her hair and weird buns on the side and a giant in a monkey suit or something. I mean, it was weird. It was very, very weird.
No more adventures. I'm not getting involved. Don't you call me a mindless philosopher. You have laid a lot of grease. Fine! I'm going to regret this.
It was tough dialogue to say. So I think I got, Governor Tarkin, I thought I recognized your foul stench, which, you know, I don't know about you, but I'm always talking like that.
Governor Tarkin, I should have expected to find you holding Vader's leash. I recognized your foul stench when I was brought on board.
Charming to the last.
We used to say you can type this stuff, but you can't say it.
George didn't really like being in London, I suppose, is the best way to say it. He doesn't like being away from home. He's not the most gregarious person in the world. He had some clashes with the cameraman. Gil Taylor was a very old-school cameraman, very crotchety. George, coming out of low-budget filmmaking, was used to doing a lot of things himself. So George would say things like, well, put a light here, and Gil took offense at that kind of thing. He says, that's not your job, son. You tell me what you want to see, and I'll do it the way I think is best to create what you want to see. It was a clash of style of working.
327, take 4. We're coming up on Alderaan.
You know, I did feel something. I can almost see the remote.
That's good. You've taken your first step into a larger world.